for spending part of your $30 ticket on sitting through this for 45 minutes. My name's Donald Simpson. I'm a veteran of the comic book industry of 30 years. I used to draw and write comics. I'm still doing that. And I'm also a teacher of art history. And I thought I'd put together a little bit of a program for you talking about corporate crossovers and independent worlds. It's called Pictopia, to call one's own. And it's about how independent creators create their own comic strips and comic books and worlds, and how some of these get eventually absorbed into bigger company universes, and in some cases creators cross over with one another. And I'm actually involved in a team-up called War of the Independents, which we'll talk about at the end, which is a grandiose crossover of Cerebus and Zippy the Pinhead, and a lot of humor characters, including my own, but also a lot of other independent superhero characters and so on. So the idea is pretty simple. I have here Dog Patch by Al Capp. Al Capp is the creator of Little Abner, mid-20th century comic strip in the DC universe there, Superman and Supergirl and Wonder Woman. These are kind of the extremes. So you have a single creator and a cartoon comic strip with a lead character and a world around that character, versus an entirely shared universe of a bunch of decades of different creators and different characters. So the first part, simply enough, again, Al Capp had Little Abner running in the comic strips for several decades. We have Sadie Hawkins Day and other cultural contributions from that legacy. There was a musical and a movie and so on. But it's a main character, Little Abner, a hillbilly, and Daisy Mae and the family, and he created a whole world, kind of an imaginary universe of his own to surround the character, called Dog Patch, this kind of fabled hillbilly world. But this represents all the different kinds of comic strips and comic books where a single creator creates a character. And got a thing on my screen. There we go. So that represents, comic strips like Bone and Cerebus and other creator-owned properties since then. To contrast that with the company universe, publisher's universe, it's important to remember that the DC universe, what we call the DC universe now, started out as independent comic strips or comic book creations of independent creators who created autonomous characters surrounded by their own imaginary worlds. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, a couple of Jewish kids from Cleveland, created Superman in the 1930s and eventually sold it to DC. Bob Kane and creators like Bill Finger and others creating Batman, also published by National Comics, and Dr. William Moulton Marston creating Wonder Woman. Each of these characters have their own worlds. They're designed to be separate. They're not designed to be teamed up or to be interrelated necessarily. Superman is in Metropolis, Batman's in Gotham City, Wonder Woman is in Gateway City, and so on. They each have distinctive styles, distinctive worldviews, I would argue. But we're so used to now seeing them together, teamed up. This is one of the earliest team-ups, World Finest Comics. What's interesting about this is that immediately Gotham City and Metropolis disappear. We have just this neutral yellow background where the two figures, the two main characters, and of course Robin the sidekick meet. A yellow background, it's a yellow world. And they're doing neutral things. They're doing a rickshaw, they're doing a tug of war. In fact, these early team-ups are really only on the covers. They don't actually meet in a story until I think Superman 72 in the 1950s, and later in World Finest around 1955. So they don't actually interact in a narrative. They just are together on the cover to promote the book. They're in separate stories inside. Here again, you have the World's Fair. You have kind of a generic skyline. It's neither Metropolis nor Gotham City. Wait a second, how's mine? Scroll down. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. Anyway, so again, we're so used to seeing them teamed up and sharing a universe, and now we have Gotham City and Metropolis both being basically New York City, but now, decades later, we have to extrapolate. We have to map. Metropolis is New York, and Gotham City is Chicago or something. We have to have a universe now, and of course the styles blend. The artists take the costume designs and turn them into kind of a generic house style. You lose the distinctive look and style of the original cartoonist creators, but you also lose that sense of an autonomous world. It's no longer a distinctive worldview of a particular city or a particular place or milieu. The same thing happens with Wonder Woman and Flash and Green Lantern and Hawkman, and these are all, again, independent creations that have been grouped together, and we're just so used to seeing them harmonized, so to speak, and their differences in drawing styles and their differences in worldviews kind of moderated, that we become used to seeing them this way. Again, you have this kind of interesting class portrait. Here's on a billboard, or you have people running, again, neutral backgrounds. There's no longer a specific world surrounding these characters. They just become teamed up in a shared universe. Same thing is true with the Marvel universe, or the Timely Comics universe. Captain America by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, The Human Torch by Carlos Burgos, and Bill Everett's Submariner. These are, again, conceived as distinct comic strip characters with distinct worlds, but they are so commonly appearing together, and particularly by third-party artists like Alex Schomburg, a great illustrator in his own right. But we're so used to seeing these characters teamed up, the great battle between the Human Torch and Submariner, water versus fire, and kind of the proto-invaders in World War II, that we've lost this sense that these were once independent creations. And again, Schomburg from 1943. And a great theme, this is one of the great comic books of my youth, Marie Severan's Hulk Submariner battle. So essentially we've got Bill Everett's Submariner, we've got Jack Kirby's Hulk, drawn by a third party, sharing the universe. We've come to accept this very commonly. We're just so used to it. But we've lost this sense that these were once distinct characters. Steranko now, and Steranko is quite the historian of comics. He could have emulated the different styles of the original creators, but he's no longer interested in doing that. Artists by this time are simply demonstrating their own style. So again, you have Steve Ditko's Spider-Man, Hulk, Thor, Silver Surfer, Thing, Iron Man, Captain America, all the Kirby characters, the Human Torch, Carlos Burgos. But again, everything has now been brought together with Steranko's overwhelming style and his classic signature. John Buscema, another example. And here you have even more of a wide-ranging universe. You've got Dracula in the center and Frankenstein, and Doc Savage was in the Marvel universe at this time. Conan the Barbarian. So you've got all these different, really incompatible creations. These were once distinct characters in distinct worlds. And we can still separate them out, and the movies, especially the Marvel movies, have taken individual characters and separated them out. But again, we're just so used to seeing them in these kind of jam universe poses that we've come to accept them as somehow compatible, but they really are not compatible. Milton Caniff, another example of a creator and his autonomous world. He did 2 comic strips, Terry and the Pirates and Steve Cannon in the 20th century. And here's the creator surrounded by his various creations. This is the Steve Canyon cast. Again, cartoonists are creating autonomous worlds. They're not necessarily at the dictates of publishers teaming up their characters with other creations. But it's just interesting to point out this John Romita, who's basically a staff artist at Marvel in the 60s, has surrounded himself with very similar imagery to Milton Caniff. Here's the artist at the drawing board daydreaming, dreaming up characters. But these are not his creations. This is Steve Ditko's Spider-Man, essentially, and all the villains. A few things that certainly John Romita is a great artist, one of my favorites growing up, but is dreaming up characters basically with other people's creations. Joe Kubert also kind of using the imagery that Caniff and other cartoonists have used, his galaxy of characters within the DC pantheon, so to speak. Now, there's a couple different kinds of crossover universes that I'd like to point out, and one is just simply the promotional universe. It doesn't have actual narrative crossing over, and I'll show you what I mean. Here's Joe Simon and Jack Kirby's letterhead from 1947, and for some reason Captain America is miscolored, and some of the Red Skull is yellow for some reason. But this was their company letterhead, which went out to correspondents. These were all different creations and features that they created for different publishing companies. So Captain America and I think the Guardian, who's a DC stock creation, and the Kid Gangs. Some of these are from different publishers, so they would never actually meet in a narrative. They only meet on the studio letterhead to kind of promote the studio and its function of providing features for different publishers. So this is a kind of just simply a promotional universe. No stories are really even possible here. It's kind of unfortunate because these would have been some great, I'm sure, great adventures. This is not unprecedented. King Features Syndicate did a lot of this kind of promotional material, and particular artist Louis Biederman, who was a staff artist at the Syndicate, would draw all the different characters, bringing up Father and Maggie and Jiggs and Felix the Cat, all these different comic strip features, and they would appear in calendars, again in very neutral kinds of things, like here they are at the racetrack or the ballpark, whatever they are in the grandstand. Here's a publication called Circulation, which would have gone to the printing industry. And again, you're seeing all of the features of King Features Syndicate teamed up in this promotional image, but actual narrative crossovers are not possible because all of these features would have been syndicated to different newspapers, sometimes rival newspapers in the same city. So you could never have an actual crossover between comic strips or actual team-ups with Felix the Cat and Crazy Cat or whatever. Kind of unfortunate. Now, one way to get across some of these divides of companies and legal ownership and syndication is the parody universe. And maybe the classic example is Harvey Kurtzman and Wally Wood's Super Duper Man, which gave us this parody team-up or crossover between Captain Marvel and Superman. Now, this wouldn't have been possible actually in the 1950s. Fawcett Comics, the publisher of Captain Marvel and Superman, were bitter rivals. In fact, DC ended up suing Fawcett for infringement and succeeding in their legal action. But if only for fan desire, we could be satisfied to see at least a humorous encounter depicted. In the 1960s, of course, Marvel and DC are the two rival publishing companies. But they seem to be flirting with this idea of Superman meeting the Fantastic Four, the kind of the flagship titles of each company. So Not Brandeck is doing a parody. Of course, Marvel is parodying their own characters, the Fantastic Four, but they're also including Superman. The inferior 5 is a DC comic, and Superman is their own character, but of course there's the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. So it seems like both companies are kind of wanting to cross over, but they can only do it through these kind of parodic gestures. Then along comes this punk named Don Simpson, that would be me, and my parody creation from the 1980s, I'm doing the same thing. I've got basically Superman meeting the Fantastic Four in these early issues from 1985. Anyway, we'll get back to that. Another interesting aspect of the parody universe is the introduction of Howard the Duck, and you have to explain to audiences today how incredibly important it was for a generation of cartoonists. This was right when I was starting to draw, I was in middle school or junior high school, drawing comics. If you loved superheroes and you were drawing Spider-Man and Captain America, you also had to learn how to draw a duck, because this became such a phenomenal, popular feature in the mid-1970s. And this particular sequence of panels, this is from Giant Size Man Thing number 5, this says it all. This is incredibly important. There are worlds upon worlds, worlds within worlds, worlds without end. Every man's mind, a universe. So those were just earth-shattering concepts when I was 14 or so. So I think it influenced a generation. We'll get back to that. So there's another kind of universe, a crossover team-up universe, the so-called, I'm calling it the special occasion or neutral ground universe. I'm thinking of historical publications like Steranko's History of Comics, where he talks about the pulps and he talks about the golden age of comics and different eras. But he does this beautiful wraparound cover around this oversized, large format publication. So you see, for the first time, Batman, Superman, Silver Surfer, Captain America, Submariner, Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, the Joker, Spider-Man, on, Captain Marvel, Hawkman. These are characters that could not be teamed up except in some kind of special event, or in this case, a history of comics, kind of a neutral, fair use universe. And the second volume of his history's got Black Hawk and again Human Torch, the Green Hornet, various other characters, again Sheena, Plastic Man, and so on. So again, we're not talking about actual narratives or actual stories, but just this kind of wish or dream of teaming up these characters. Same thing's going on in the underground comics of the time. This is the Rand Holmes cover to the History of Underground Comics. And you have Wonder Warthog and the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers and Robert Crumb and Robert Williams characters, Mickey the Rat, on and on. This was a much more far-ranging, snappy Sammy Smoot over there. It was a much more far-ranging team-up than might have been possible to get all these guys together. Of course, Zap Comics did have jams in their comics. So you have Victor Moscoso and his dinosaur television set guys and taxi cabs, and you have Robert Crumb and let's see, who else? S. Clay Wilson, Spain Rodriguez, Rick Griffin, Robert Williams, Gilbert Shelton. And so these artists are actually jamming. This is almost another category of team-ups, the jam universe, where cartoonists are drawing their own characters and creating this team-up, very abstract and bizarre surrealist team-up in this case. But this requires, of course, trafficking around the artwork and getting everybody to physically be able to draw on it, which is a little bit difficult. I've been involved in some of those kind of jam team-ups. Another case of a special event team-up would be the cover of the Comics Journal, which could do Cerebus and the Spirit and Dalgota and Omaha the Cat Dancer, Howard Chaykin's American Flag, Zot, Neil the Horse, Robert Crumb could all team up again, not really in a narrative and not a story, but for a kind of polemical cartoon about, this was the comic book industry at the time, which publisher was going to go out of business first. They were all racing over the cliff. And Scott McCloud doing his Globe here in Understanding Comics. He can again team up all these characters kind of as a neutral educational exercise. His famous pyramid, which also appears in Understanding Comics, and somebody's got to explain McCloudianism to me. This is beyond me. But for some reason, there's my character right in the middle. I'd like to know what the cosmic significance is of being exactly in the middle of the triangle. So this has something to do with meaning, reality, the picture plane, certain abstract symbolisms. Anyway, so those kinds of team-ups are possible. Again, the Comics Journal, this is my cover to the Comics Journal from 1987, and I was able to indulge my desire to see, you know, the Spirit and Inky Bilal and Steve Rude's Nexus and Bill Loeb's and Omaha the Camp Dancer and Harvey Pico, Reed Fleming, Ralph Snart, Swamp Thing. Again, team-ups that could never actually happen in a narrative, at least not so easily as putting them into a group shot like this. So, yet another category, and we're talking now of the 1980s, 1970s, 1980s, the cross-company crossover and company-wide crossover events. So, at this point in comics history, publishers are beginning to awaken to the fact that fans will actually pay to see these team-ups, especially Superman versus Spider-Man. Spider-Man and Dracula did not, that was kind of just an internal Marvel team-up. Noteworthy because they don't actually meet. They kind of, you know, the vampire universe and the superhero universe don't quite blend together. But Superman and Spider-Man certainly. What's interesting is there's no dimensional explanation in this narrative. It's just like Superman or Clark Kent, Lois Lane, they just come to New York. Like they've never been to New York. They've always been in Metropolis. But I thought they were the same city. I mean, I don't know. So there's no narrative explanation. Nobody gets caught in a black hole. They just kind of run into each other one day. And of course, the granddaddies of crossovers, the Secret Wars and Crisis on Infinite Earths. That's every character, all the time. What's interesting about these team-ups is that nobody ever has time to be in their secret identity anymore. They're just wearing their costumes all the time, and everybody else has got their costume on. So more in my era of creators of the 80s and the 90s, we begin to see satirical or synthetic universes. Creators begin to internalize this idea of crossovers and universes and shared universes, and they begin to, instead of creating a single character in a world, they begin doing a whole universe at once. And again, this is a job that I was involved in. I illustrated in Pictopia, hence the title of the talk. And this was Alan Moore's mixture of syndicate cartooning, comic book company characters, and animation and all that kind of stuff. And they all live in a little city where things are threatened by corporate takeovers, so even the buildings have panels of comic strips here. And Mandrake the magician lives in a slum, and Blondie is turned to prostitution. It's a very polemical use of the universe idea that the sinister corporations are taking over. This was my friend Mike Ghazala, who did the animated slum, the funny animal area part of the city. And Plastic Man has become an alcoholic because funny comics aren't popular anymore. And then there's these new bullies on the block, the kind of mutant X-Men kind of people. Mandrake, or whatever he's called, the magician character, is kind of the central protagonist, and he's hanging out in the bar with the Yellow Kid and all this other stuff. Now this is before Who Framed Roger Rabbit, so this was kind of an original idea. But Alan Moore in this case had a point to make about the industry at that time, whereas Disney was just kind of teaming up Warner Brothers and Fleischer Cartoons and so on. Of course, the Image universe itself is a synthetic universe. This is a bunch of creators who got together and created their characters not as independent entities, but with the understanding that it would be a shared universe. This was Image United, which is still unfinished. I thought that this was a really shared universe, but they've never actually had much more than a few team-ups. Kurt Busiek, I think, has done more in that vein of thinking through an entire universe and creating an entire universe all at once, not just a single character in the world, but a whole kind of big company universe with lots of complicated characters. And something else I was involved in 1963, which was published by Image Comics. Alan Moore again, Rick Veitch, and Steve Bissett. And they were creating a pseudo-Marvel Comics group era kind of universe. Again, these are independent titles, or separate titles, Mystery Incorporated, The Fury, Uncanny, and so on. But they are designed to be a universe of interaction, and of course the grandiose team-up that was supposed to end the series was never finished. So it's this unfinished polemical universe. This is a panel from, I think this is the Mystery Incorporated panel. And this is from 1963. Here's my universe of bizarre heroes. There's Cerebus the Aardvark, Rick Veitch, Mr. Monster. Here's Jim Valentino's Normal Man, and so forth. So they're making a nod to all of us independent creators, and we're all we're all in different dimensions. Everything's got to be a dimension now. We're all separated by dimensions. Big Bang versus 1963. So now you have universes teaming up with one another. It's not just a single character teaming up, but the entire universe has to interact with another universe. But I'd like to point out that even a comic book like the Fantastic Four can be thought of as a synthetic universe. This was really a team up within a single title. You had kind of H.G. Wells' Invisible Person, Carlos Burgos' Human Torch, kind of Plastic Man, even Bill Everett's Submariner. So these are, Kirby was kind of synthesizing a universe from different ideas. You can think of this as a kind of team up within its own title. To digress a little bit, in the 1970s there was an idea put forward by Philip Jose Farmer. It's come to be known as the Wool-Newton universe. And his obsession, of course, Farmer is doing this, I think, with his tongue in cheek, but he's obsessed that all these pulp fiction characters, Tarzan, Sherlock Holmes, The Shadow, Doc Savage, are really related. So why did they all have different publishing contracts with different publishers? I don't know. But he extrapolates this incredibly complicated family tree. So G8 is related to Alan Quatermain and so on and so forth. I did a little parody of this in Megaton Man. I have Doc Megaton, and in fact I have a little janitor who's named Philip Jose, and a family tree of Megaton Man, and there's a frog and a Wolverine and so forth. Anyway, so this was an influential idea. Alan Moore, again, has used it more than anybody else in comics with the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. You've got Captain Nemo, Alan Quatermain, Jekyll and Hyde, Tom Sawyer, as a kind of Victorian supergroup teaming up. Again, independent creations. They weren't designed to go together. They were written by different authors in distinct worlds, but Alan is taking them all. Because they're in the public domain, he can do this. So now we get to the final era of team-ups, the present era, and we have this interesting phenomenon, which again I'm involved in tangentially, the voluntary team-up or the pseudo-corporate crossover. And you have characters, you have creators teaming up with one another, but the granddaddy of them all is this project called War of the Independents, which has been published by Red Anvil Comics. 3 issues have come out. It's a 6-issue series, and these are all independent characters, and the creators have given their permission to have a kind of Secret Wars Crisis on Infinite Earth team up. So you've got the Tick, you've got Zippy the Pinhead, Too Much Coffee Man, hundreds of others, Milk and Cheese, hundreds of other characters that I can't even begin to name, Badger, She, and just in terms of getting everybody to sign a contract and turn it back in, the individual creators are not drawing and inking their own characters. Thank God. You could imagine all the FedEx packages running around, or all the scanning and emailing that would have to take place. But my involvement is in the long-awaited 4th issue, which I just finished this week, as a matter of fact. This was the first page I did, and I was going back to college. I looked online and somebody was looking for me. Somebody named Dave Ryan was looking for me on a bulletin board. I contacted him months after he made this post, and I said, "Hi, I'm Don Simpson." I sent him an email. He said, "I'm sorry, who are you?" He'd forgotten why he wanted to get in touch with me. So I created Megaton Man. I imagine you want to get my permission for this team up. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. So anyway, we decided I would just do a page cameo. So I'm drawing my characters, but I'm also drawing Milk and Cheese and Bone and a Drunken Monkey, Too Much Coffee Man, Zippy, Flaming Carrot, and that was just going to be it. I was just going to do this one page, and they're all running around a restaurant, and dishes go flying. But a couple years later, Dave got the permission to use the Tick, and he thought, well, why not have Megaton Man meet the Tick on the back cover? So I did the back cover, and again, I got to draw Zippy, and this is Yarn Man, one of my characters, Cerebus. I originally drew Billy Tucci's She up here, but she's not in the issue, so he pasted it over with Felix the Cat, Milk and Cheese, Bone, Flaming Carrot. And then this book just kind of languished for a couple of years, and he said, why don't you draw the whole thing? So now I have to draw all these different characters. And this is very different from the Comics Journal cover I showed you before. The Comics Journal cover, I could just swipe individual drawings line for line and imitate the inking styles. But here I had to actually learn how to draw these characters so I could tell a story, because they all move in different ways, and you can never find the right pose to swipe. So I actually had to learn how to draw the Archie characters. Unfortunately, Archie pulled out, so this panel was completely invalidated. But you have, there's Stan Sakai's Usagi Yojimbo, Pokey and Gumby. There was this, Bean World's Mr. Spook, Zippy the Tick. And these are all MLJ Archie characters: Archie, Betty, Veronica, Jughead. This is a character called Super Doc. I never even heard of this, from the 50s. There's an alien character, Oscar the Alien or something. But I had to do research, and I had to learn how to draw these characters. As I say, I just wrapped this up this week. This is the final page. There's Protoplasm Man, Too Much Coffee Man. These are Public Enemy. The two rappers, Public Enemy, are in the story. Rat Bastard is in the story. There's Megaton Man. Megaton, my characters only appear on a couple different pages. They're not the main characters. I didn't want to use this as a promotional vehicle, but I do have them kind of sticking in a couple panels here. Cerebus, and of course Zippy, Tick, and Flaming Carrot. These are some of Dave's animation characters. So I finally wrapped this up this week. So it's gotten to the point where, publishers, fans wanted to see team-ups, publishers wanted to satisfy that market and cross over Batman and Superman and other characters. But now independent creators themselves have internalized this ethos,